When the spatial fluctuation surged forth, Chen was the first to react. Spiritual energy erupted from his body as he immediately shielded both himself and Luoli in his arms. However, the expected attack never came. The spatial fluctuations merely persisted for a few breaths before completely dissipating. Chen held the slender waist of the girl in his arms as they descended onto a mountain peak. Thick spiritual mist still enveloped the surroundings, and no other movements could be detected. It was clear that they remained deep within the Western Desolation realm, and the earlier spatial fluctuation had merely served to separate them from the others. "It seems we were discovered long ago," Luoli remarked, her clear eyes scanning the surroundings. Chen nodded, his gaze filled with vigilance. The sudden development unsettled him. He had no idea how the others were faring. The previous spatial fluctuation was too weak to have scattered us too far apart, but it was enough for them to isolate and pick us off one by one, Luoli said softly. "We need to regroup as soon as possible." Chen frowned, contemplating for a moment before speaking. Their mission was already dangerous enough, and now they were exposed while their enemies lurked in the shadows. Worse still, they had been separated right from the start. This was an incredibly unfavorable situation for them. Luoli gave a slight nod. Fortunately, Chen had reacted quickly, allowing the two of them to remain together. Otherwise, she would have been extremely worried. Chen stepped forward, black flame spiritual energy surging around him. He took the lead, his eyes scanning the dense mist warily. Whoosh! The moment he moved, his gaze sharpened, and he abruptly retreated several steps. A streak of violent crimson light tore through the mist like lightning, striking the exact spot where he had just stood. The ground instantly fractured, cracks spreading outward like a spider web. Chen looked ahead and saw a black spear embedded deep into the ground, only a small portion of it remaining above the surface. It trembled violently, its sheer force astonishing. Sizzle! Before Chen could react further, another section of the mist was suddenly ripped apart. A barrage of crimson streaks shot forth like a storm. Luoli stepped forward, gripping her sword tightly. With a sweep of sword chi, she deflected the incoming crimson lights, the sound of clashing metal ringing through the air. Clap! Clap! Amid the mist, the sound of slow clapping echoed. Chen's eyes turned icy as he stared toward the source. The thick mist gradually dissipated, revealing two figures. They stood atop a towering rock, one seated, the other standing. The seated figure wore a crimson robe, a sinister scar running across his face. In his palm, more than a dozen fiery daggers floated, weaving through his fingers like swimming fish. The standing figure was a lean man, his small frame carrying an eerie presence. Despite his size, he bore 8 massive black spears on his back, each taller than a person, creating an unnerving visual impact. Both men gazed at Chen and Luoli with amused smiles. My, what a lucky day, the crimson-robed man said, his eyes scanning the two before locking onto Luoli. A gleam flashed in his gaze as he grinned. Never seen these two before. Could they be newcomers? Huh. Looks like the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy is getting desperate, sending out rookies like this. The lean man sneered, licking his lips. Indeed. Sending Heaven Transformation stage students on a mission like this? The Academy must be losing its edge, the crimson-robed man added, glancing at Chen with a strange expression. Late Heaven Transformation stage, and you dare come here to save people? You're just asking to die. He flicked his fingers, and the fiery daggers in his palm began spinning even faster. With a lazy smile, he looked at Chen and said, "Listen, kid, I'll give you a chance. Run along now and leave the girl with us. Maybe you'll live a little longer." Chen stared at them, his voice devoid of emotion. "You must be Chiyu, ranked 7th on the bounty ranking, and Mao Jiang, ranked 8th. Oh? So you've read up on us?" Chiyu chuckled, gripping a dagger and running his tongue along its blade. A murderous glint flashed in his eyes. "Enough talk, kid. Get lost. I haven't seen a girl this fine in years." The clear, crisp sound of a sword's hum suddenly reverberated through the air. A sharp and unmatched sword aura swept forward, tearing through the earth with an indescribable speed, then slashing down towards Chiyu's face. Clang! A black spear suddenly pierced through from the side, striking heavily against the sword aura. As spiritual energy exploded, the earth was directly cut apart, and the black spear was sent flying back. SSS. Several sharp sword auras grazed Chiyu's face, leaving behind a few bloody marks. Chiyu's expression shifted, and his figure quickly retreated. His face darkened as he looked at the young girl standing beside Mu Chen, holding a black long sword, her gaze fixed on him with the contempt one might reserve for an insect. Quite a flavor, Chiyu gritted his teeth, wiping the blood from his face, his eyes swirling with a sinister light. Shall I handle him? Luo Li slightly tilted her head, seeking Mu Chen's opinion. As for this disgusting man with such vile eyes, she wanted nothing more than to chop him down with a single sword. Cut off his hands, leave him alive. Mu Chen nodded lightly, his voice carrying a strong killing intent. Luo Li smiled sweetly, the smile holding a touch of sweetness. All right. Attack. Kill them. Chiyu's gaze darkened. These two, aside from the black-robed girl being difficult to deal with due to her early heaven-reaching stage cultivation, Mu Chen was practically a burden. To think they dare to act pretentious in front of them. The spear general grinned grimly, grabbing a black spear in his hand. With a flick of his arm, the spear burst forth, releasing dazzling black light like a black dragon, tearing through the air. Even the earth split open, creating a huge crack, and the spear shot directly towards Mu Chen. Mu Chen took a step forward without hesitation, showing no intention of retreating. His fingers tightened into a fist, black lightning swirling around his body, and then he threw a powerful punch. Boom! Black lightning surged. Mu Chen's punch collided forcefully with the incoming black spear. Get lost. Mu Chen's eyes were icy, the lightning flaring wildly. The black spear was actually shattered by his punch. What? Both Chiyu and the spear general's expressions changed drastically at the same time. Shock flashed in their eyes. The spear general's attack was so powerful that even Chiyu, at the early heaven-reaching stage, wouldn't dare to block it with his bare fist. Yet now, this boy, seemingly only at the late heaven transformation stage, was able to do the impossible? Early heaven-reaching stage, and still daring to jump around here? You truly don't know how to die. Mu Chen's handsome face darkened, his eyes full of coldness and killing intent. He absolutely would not let these two insolent men go today. Whoosh! As his words fell, dragon shadows rose around him, his body like lightning as he shot straight at the spear general. You're so full of yourself. The spear general's eyes turned cold, and he rushed out as well. With both hands gripping a black spear, he released his spiritual energy, and the spear quivered. It transformed into a sea of spear shadows, enveloping Mu Chen. However, facing this onslaught, Mu Chen didn't dodge at all. Black lightning flickered around him as he allowed the spear shadows to strike his body. Clang! Clang! The sound of metal clashing rang out, sparks flying. The spear shadows couldn't injure Mu Chen in the slightest. Boom! He threw a punch, piercing through the spear shadows. Spiritual energy surged with terrifying fluctuations as his fist slammed into the spear general's chest. The spear general was startled by Mu Chen's ferocity. He quickly withdrew his spears, crossing them in front of his chest. Clang! Mu Chen's fist struck the double spears with tremendous force, the fine iron spears bending under the pressure, nearly pressing against the spear general's chest. A cold glint flashed in Mu Chen's eyes as black lightning surged around his fist, his power growing explosively. Crack! The fine iron spears shattered completely, and Mu Chen's punch like lightning crashed into the spear general's chest. The spear general immediately vomited a mouthful of blood, his body flying hundreds of feet backward before he managed to stabilize himself in a sorry state. When he finally regained his footing, his eyes were filled with horror. He never expected that this boy, seemingly only at the late heaven transformation stage, would possess such terrifying strength. Chiyu's face also turned grim upon witnessing this scene. He looked at the young man, whose body was cloaked in black lightning, and for some reason, a feeling of unease began to rise in his heart. Whoosh! A cold glint flashed in Chi Yu's eyes as he flicked his finger. However, just as the crimson light streaked out, a delicate figure appeared behind Mu Chen. The sword aura swept through, severing the crimson light instantly. Luo Li stood midair, her black dress enveloping her graceful figure, her long hair cascading down like a galaxy of stars. But at that moment, her clear, glass-like eyes emitted a cold, indifferent light. "Leave your arms behind, or I'll get scolded," the young girl said softly, gazing at Chi Yu. Chi Yu gritted his teeth and sneered. "You think you can?" Luo Li tightened her grip on the sword in her jade hand and slowly raised it, pointing it toward Chi Yu. A terrifying sword aura shot up into the sky, shattering the surrounding spiritual mist within 1,000 feet. "Just me." A faint, indifferent smile seemed to appear on her exquisite face. Amidst her beauty, a hint of killing intent leaked through. With a slight tremor of her jade hand, the immense sword aura gathered above her head, forming a sword chi river. The sword chi river radiated an extremely terrifying fluctuation, causing Chi Yu's expression to darken. Who could have guessed that these seemingly easy-to-handle youths would be so troublesome and difficult to deal with? This time, they had truly kicked an iron plate. The spiritual mist surrounded the world, but on the mountain peak, the mist within a few thousand feet dissipated at this moment. For figures stood suspended in the air, facing each other. The overwhelming spiritual energy surged around them, preventing the mist from approaching. The expressions of Mao Jiang and Chi Yu darkened, their originally easy targets suddenly transforming from harmless lambs to vicious wolves, putting them in a very awkward position. "Now, even if you regret it, I'm afraid it's too late," Mu Chen said coldly, staring at Mao Jiang. His body shimmered with black lightning, and a faint thunder rune appeared beneath his clothes. A ferocious and powerful force surged within him like an enraged dragon. "Regret? Late heaven transformation stage, and you dare speak to us like that? When we ruled over the North Song continent, you hadn't even grown your hair yet." Mao Jiang laughed angrily. "Is that so?" A cold smile spread across the corners of Mu Chen's lips. His eyes flashed with black lightning as he took a step forward. His figure appeared in front of Mao Jiang like a ghost, the force of his punch roaring through the air. The spiritual energy, burning with black flame and crackling with black lightning, surged toward Mao Jiang with an unmatched ferocity. Mao Jiang's eyes darkened, and all his spiritual energy exploded out, turning into countless spear shadows that shot toward Mu Chen. Today, he refused to believe that his formidable early heaven-reaching stage strength couldn't suppress a mere late heaven transformation stage brat. Bang! Bang! The two collided in midair, their spiritual energy wildly rampaging. The space itself seemed to twist, and the storm of force tore apart the surrounding spiritual mist. As Mu Chen and Mao Jiang clashed, Luo Li pointed the tip of her sword. The sword chi river surged downward, sharp and filled with killing intent, enveloping Chi Yu, whose expression was darkened. Humph! Chi Yu's eyes were filled with coldness. His red spiritual energy surged like flames, and with a change of hand seals, his spiritual energy condensed into countless red daggers. These daggers shimmered with a chilling light and, with a wave of his hand, transformed into a torrential rain of light that stormed toward the sword chi river. Sizzle! Sizzle! In midair, the red light rain collided with the sword chi river, but it dissipated instantly. The sword's sharpness far exceeded what Chi Yu had imagined. The red light rain was shattered completely, and the remaining sword chi river swept toward Chi Yu. Chi Yu hastily retreated, but the sword chi river still swept across his waist and abdomen, leaving a hideous blood stain, blood pouring out. "You little brat, you're asking for death." Chi Yu roared furiously, clenching his palm. 10 red beams of light shot out, forming 10 short swords around him, resembling magma solidified into weapons. These short swords dripped with magma, releasing an extremely intense heat, an astonishing fluctuation of energy. Clearly, these 10 short swords were spirit artifacts, and they were a set. While individually they would be considered middle-grade spirit artifacts, when combined, Their power was comparable to that of superior-grade spirit artifacts. Qiyu flicked his 10 fingers, and the 10 short swords instantly transformed into 10 red serpents that howled as they streaked through the sky, cutting through the air with vicious trajectories, aiming to bite at Luoli. However, Luoli remained calm in the face of the red serpents. Sword Chi rippled around her, forming a protective shield, and she effortlessly deflected the violent attacks one after another. The two battlefields in the sky erupted into fierce combat at that very moment. As time passed, however, Qiyu and Mao Zhang's eyes grew increasingly grim. They could sense mounting pressure, feeling that the young man and woman before them were releasing power that even made their hearts race with unease. A sense of unease crept into their minds. If things continued like this, they feared they might gradually fall into a disadvantage. They had to deal with these two quickly. Prolonging the battle could put them at a severe disadvantage. Both Qiyu and Mao Zhang's eyes flashed with a murderous intent. Bang! Mao Zhang's spear collided violently with Mu Chen's fist, the shockwave sending him hurtling backward. As he retreated, his eyes turned a deep crimson. Boom! A torrent of violent spiritual energy erupted from his body like a storm, spreading through the air. His hands swiftly changed their hand seals, and the surging energy began to condense above him, slowly taking shape into a colossal black stone spear that seemed to pierce the heavens and the earth. The stone spear looked ancient, covered in mysterious markings, exuding a heavy and primal energy, as if it could pierce the very fabric of the world. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this. It was clear that Mao Zhang was preparing a formidable divine attack. Kid, die! Mao Zhang roared, spitting out a mouthful of blood that landed on the stone spear. Immediately, the spear darkened, and a malevolent aura began to emanate from it. Blood God wore Heaven's spear. Mao Zhang roared again. The giant stone spear shot up into the sky and then descended like a torrent of blood light, smashing into the earth below. The ground shattered upon impact, and the space itself was torn open. Mu Chen raised his head, looking up at the incoming spear that carried with it terrifying power. His hands swiftly changed again, and 3 massive beastly shadows began to form in the sky behind him, howling in ancient fury. The 3 divine seals of the 4 deities' constellation canon were invoked once more, their power now stronger than ever with Mu Chen's growing strength. Roar! The 3 giant beasts let out deafening roars and stepped through the air, transforming into 3 different colored light arcs that spiraled toward the incoming stone spear, carrying an overwhelming surge of spiritual energy as they collided. Boom! A violent spiritual energy storm raged across the area, shattering mountains and splitting the earth with massive cracks. Mao Zhang focused on the chaotic storm, waiting for it to subside. After a long pause, the storm began to calm. However, Mu Chen's figure had disappeared. Did he get reduced to pieces? Mao Zhang swept his gaze over the area, a look of joy appearing in his eyes. This was his ultimate move. How dare Mu Chen resist it head-on? He must have a death wish. But it's not over yet. What are you so happy about? Just as the joy flickered in Mao Zhang's eyes, a mocking voice suddenly rang out from above. Mao Zhang's expression changed, and he hastily looked up, only to see Mu Chen's figure high in the sky. Behind him, a massive black pagoda materialized, its 9 levels emitting an overwhelming force. Let's see who can suppress whom. Mu Chen sneered. The 9-level Futu pagoda erupted with countless rays of light, flashing across the tower's surface, quickly reaching the 4th level. Roar! Golden patterns appeared on the tower, and 4 golden dragons roared as they broke free from the pagoda, coiling around it. In the past, Mu Chen could only activate 2 levels of the 9-level Futu pagoda, but with his improved strength, he was now able to activate up to 4 levels. Suppress it! Mu Chen slapped his hand down. The 9-level Futu pagoda, with 4 golden dragons spiraling around it, crashed downward, casting a huge shadow as it aimed to suppress the terrified Mao Zhang. 10,000 spears divine art! Mao Zhang roared in response. Countless black light spears appeared out of thin air and rained down on the descending black pagoda, blasting toward it in a massive wave. Boom! Boom! However, The level 9 Futu Tower showed no signs of mercy. It ruthlessly pressed down, shattering countless light spears that could not stop it in the slightest. Bang! In just a few breaths, the level 9 Futu Tower had obliterated the countless light spears in the sky. With the spear general's horrified gaze, it violently slammed onto his massive spiritual energy barrier. The spear general's face instantly turned pale, and a mouthful of fresh blood sprayed out as his body plummeted, crashing into a mountain peak below, causing it to collapse. Swish! Just as the spear general's body was covered by the giant rocks, he awkwardly sprang out. His body was drenched in blood, his face pale, and his eyes filled with horror. The previous strike from Mu Chen had heavily wounded him, and he could sense that when the Black Tower suppressed him, his internal spiritual energy had stagnated, as if it had been sealed. This kid is so strange. The spear general's heart trembled as the thought of retreat began to form. If he didn't leave now, he would surely be slain by Mu Chen here. Whoosh! As the thought crossed his mind, his body shot forward like lightning. As long as he entered the spirit mist zone, escaping would be a breeze. In the sky, Mu Chen watched the spear general darting away, and a cold smile flashed in his eyes as he changed his hand seal. The spear general was only 100 feet away from the spirit mist zone, but just as he was about to break in, the mist suddenly trembled violently. The mist dispersed, and behind it, 2 massive spirit arrays appeared. As the arrays activated, spiritual energy surged, and 2 rays of rainbow light shot out, crashing directly into the unprepared spear general's body. Boom! His body was sent flying once more, his eyes filled with sheer terror. When had those spirit arrays been set up in the mist? His body slammed heavily into the mountain, and his breath immediately weakened. Blood spurted out wildly, and his chest caved in. He looked up at the sky in disbelief, watching as Mu Chen slowly descended. With a wave of his sleeve, the distant spirit arrays disappeared. Mu Chen looked down coldly at the severely wounded spear general. He clenched his palm, and a black spear appeared in his hand. He snapped it into 4 segments and flicked his fingers, sending 4 bolts of black light into the spear general's limbs, pinning him to the mountain, unable to move. Ah! The spear general screamed in agony. His eyes filled with intense fear. This young man's methods were too brutal. Up in the sky, Qiyu, who was still entangled with Luoli, shuddered when he heard the scream. He quickly looked over and saw the spear general nailed to the mountain by Mu Chen. His eyes filled with shock. How could this kid be so powerful? Run! Qiyu's fighting spirit was instantly extinguished. He understood that the hunt had already failed. If he didn't flee now, he would meet the same fate as the spear general. Swish! Without hesitation, he suddenly retreated, and his 10 magma-like daggers transformed into red serpents, attacking Luoli fiercely, trying to ensnare her. Luoli's clear eyes coldly watched the retreating Qiyu. Her jade hand slowly tightened around her long sword. With a flick of her delicate finger, the sword sheath flew out, revealing a cold gleam. The temperature in the air plummeted. Holding the sword, she slowed her movements and lightly slashed down. Whoosh! As her sword cut down, the space in front of her was torn apart. The 10 red serpents froze in place, and the sword light swept through their bodies, splitting them in half. Crack! The 10 shattered magma daggers fell to the ground, their spiritual energy dissipating. This superior-grade spirit artifact had been destroyed by Luo Li's single sword strike. With the destruction of the spirit artifact, Qi was also affected. A mouthful of blood sprayed out, and his eyes grew even more horrified. But just as he was about to speed up his retreat, the space behind him shattered, and 2 sword lights crossed, grazing his shoulder. His body froze in mid-air. Luo Li hovered in the air, extending her jade hand as the sword sheath flew back into her grasp. She slowly sheathed her sword, producing a soft hum. Clang! At the very moment the sword was sheathed, Qiyu spat out a mouthful of blood. His arms slowly detached from his shoulders, the break smooth as a mirror. As his arms slid from his shoulders, a blood-curdling scream filled the air. Luo Li descended gracefully, her beautiful eyes radiating a chilling coldness. The tip of her sword hovered before Chi Yu's throat, the piercing sword intent freezing him to the core. His face turned pale, unable to make a move. Not far away, Mu Chen watched with a faint smile. He clenched his hand, pulling Mao Jiang toward him and tossing him beside Chi Yu. The two former top-tier bounty hunters, who had once looked so imposing, now appeared utterly disheveled, no longer exuding any of their previous grandeur. "You too. Seems like the outcome wasn't what you expected," Mu Chen said with a teasing smile, looking at the two of them, who were pale and covered in dust. Chi Yu's arms were severed, his eyes now filled with venom as he glared at Mu Chen. Mao Jiang gritted his teeth and snarled, "Don't get cocky. This time, none of you will escape." Mu Chen smiled faintly. "Well then, tell me about your plan." "Dream on." Chi Yu sneered. Mu Chen flicked his fingers, and a beam of spiritual light shot out, crashing into Chi Yu's chest. The impact sent him flying hundreds of meters away. Mu Chen didn't even spare him another glance and turned his attention to Mao Jiang. "If you want to end up like him, I can arrange that." Mao Jiang's heart trembled as he looked at the seemingly young and handsome face of Mu Chen, whose eyes, though cold, were filled with cruelty. Mao Jiang was shaken. The ruthless methods Mu Chen displayed were enough to make even him uneasy. This wasn't the sort of skill you'd expect from someone who came from a place like the Northern Song Spiritual Academy, an ivory tower. You don't stand a chance. Devil Dragon Child is not someone you can contend with. Mao Jiang gritted his teeth. "If you let us go now, you might still make it out. Otherwise, if you fall into the hands of the Devil Dragon Child, none of you will survive." "What does he want?" Mu Chen frowned slightly. "What does he want? Of course, he plans to devour all of you. That way, the Northern Song Spiritual Academy will suffer a heavy blow, and his position in the Dragon Demon Palace will rise." Mao Jiang sneered. "Can he even stomach that?" Mu Chen mocked. "The three generals from the punishment hall are out in full force. Does the Devil Dragon Child really have such a big appetite?" Mu Chen chuckled coldly. Lin Zheng and his trio were all mid-heaven reaching stage, not any weaker than Shan Songxing. The Devil Dragon Child and his people might be strong, but it wasn't certain that they could easily take them down. Once they rescued Shan Songxing and Li Xiantong, their strength would easily surpass the enemy's. "You really underestimate the Devil Dragon Child," Mao Jiang taunted. "By now, he should have found Lin Zheng. If I'm right, Lin Zheng has already been defeated. As for the ancient Heavenly Flame and Zhou Qingshan from the three generals, Mu Gu and Gue Xiong will hold them off. Once the Devil Dragon Child is free, he'll take care of them too. And the others? Do they have any abilities worth mentioning?" Mu Chen's pupils contracted slightly. The Devil Dragon Child was that powerful? He could even defeat Lin Zheng? "Don't think that just because you rescue Shen Songxing and Li Xiantong, you'll become stronger. They're both poisoned by the Devil Dragon Child's Devil Dragon poison. They can't even save themselves, so even if you rescue them, it won't make much of a difference." Mao Jiang continued to mock Mu Chen. The sneer on his face was full of derision. These guys wanted to challenge the Devil Dragon Child? Were they looking for death? A cold glint flashed in Mu Chen's eyes. Truly, this was the second-ranked super powerhouse on the bounty list. He was formidable indeed. "What should we do now?" Luo Li asked softly, approaching Mu Chen. This situation was indeed bad for them. The enemy was trying to split them up, picking them off one by one. Once Lin Zheng and his trio were dealt with, they would have a hard time resisting the enemy. Mu Chen's eyes flickered, and after a brief moment of thought, he turned to Mao Jiang. "You should know where Shen Songxing and Li Xiantong are, right? You still want to save them? They're poisoned. Even if you save them, it's useless." Mao Jiang sneered. "That's none of your concern. Just lead the way," Mu Chen replied with a faint smile. Since the enemy wanted to separate them, he could use this chance to find Shan Songxing and Li Xiantong. He could find a way to cure their poison, and if he succeeded, their strength would soar. At that point, a surprise counterattack might turn the tide. Of course, the key was that he needed to act fast, to rescue Shen Songxing and Li Xiantong before the enemy captured all their people and restore their combat capabilities. "I'll ask Chi Yu for the route. If I find out the path you lead us on is wrong, Don't blame me for turning you into a human stick and leaving you here, Mu Chen said with a faint smile, but his expression was chilling. Mao Jiang shuddered at the smile. His skin crawled, and he didn't doubt Mu Chen's ruthlessness. You spare my life, and I'll lead the way. Mao Jiang was a decisive man, and at this moment, he had little choice but to grit his teeth and agree. That depends on your performance. Mu Chen remained noncommittal, then darted forward, grabbing Chi Yu. From a distance, it seemed as though they exchanged a few words. After a while, Mu Chen returned, carrying the unconscious Chi Yu. Let's move. Mu Chen looked at Luo Li, who nodded in response. Without hesitation, Mu Chen hoisted the heavily injured Mao Jiang and, together with Luo Li, swiftly charged into the dense spiritual mist, speeding toward the direction Mao Jiang had indicated. Meanwhile, deep within the western Desolation realm, atop a massive rock resembling a small mountain, a figure seated cross-legged furrowed his brows slightly. He lifted his gaze toward Mu Chen's group and muttered, "That direction? Isn't that where Chi Yu and Mao Jiang went? Judging from this, they must have been captured, and now they're heading deeper inside. Are they trying to rescue Shan Songxing and Li Xianhong?" This man had unremarkable features, but his eyes were chillingly cold, like a venomous serpent. He was none other than Wu Jia, the only fifth-rank spirit array master among the top 10 on the bounty ranking. His gaze flickered slightly before shifting ahead. In that area, an enormous spirit array was in operation, and within it, 4 figures were trapped. Upon closer inspection, they were none other than He Yao, Su Xian, and Su Huang. The 3 had encountered each other midway, and soon after ran into Wu Jia, who had been waiting for them. But against a well-prepared 5th-rank spirit array master, even their combined efforts proved futile. They were completely restrained by the spirit array, unable to break free. Fortunately, by working together, they barely managed to defend themselves. Wu Jia stared at the 3 inside the spirit array, frowning slightly. Compared to Shan Songxing and Li Xianhong, these 3 academy members were of lesser importance. But if both sides were entangled, it would hinder their pursuit of the real targets. "I'll let you off for now." Wu Jia sneered, then suddenly stood up. Without hesitation, he vanished into the spiritual mist. With Wu Jia's departure, the spirit array trapping He Yao and the others started to slow in its operation. Seeing this, they heaved a sigh of relief and immediately focused on breaking out. Whoosh! Within the thick spiritual mist, Mu Chen and Luo Li shot forward at full speed, their spiritual energy surging outward, keeping the mist at bay. They were racing against time. They knew that if Devil Dragon Child truly managed to take down Lin Zheng's trio, then their side would face a complete defeat. Mao Jiang, still being carried by Mu Chen, kept pointing the way. But deep in his eyes, a faint glint flickered. Swish! The 2 figures once again burst forward. But just as they were about to plunge into another stretch of spiritual mist, Mu Chen's eyes suddenly narrowed. He grabbed Luo Li's slender wrist and swiftly retreated. Boom! Ahead, the spiritual mist was torn apart, and multiple massive spiritual light beams shot out like raging dragons, hurtling toward them with overwhelming force. Luo Li's beautiful eyes turned icy as she gripped her sword. Several powerful sword auras erupted, slicing through the incoming spiritual light beams. Ha! Who would have thought that Chi Yu and Mao Jiang would fall into the hands of 2 academy members? A voice filled with surprise echoed from the mist. As the spiritual mist swirled, a figure gradually emerged. It was Wu Jia. Behind him, a colossal spirit array was slowly activating, ready to strike at any moment. 5th on the bounty ranking, Wu Jia, huh? Mu Chen frowned slightly as he stared at the man. "You 2 should stop here. I won't let you go any farther," Wu Jia said with a faint smile. Mu Chen's eyes were cold, and a murderous glint flickered within them. But just as he was about to act, Luo Li took a step forward. She turned to him with a gentle smile. "Let me hold him off. You go save them." Mu Chen was momentarily stunned, hesitating. "Have a little faith in me, will you?" Luo Li pouted playfully. Mu Chen always wanted to protect her, but did he really think so little of her, the next queen of the Luo God clan? Mu Chen let out a helpless chuckle and nodded lightly. He wasn't particularly worried. Luo Li's hidden cards were something even he couldn't figure out, but she rarely took action. Mu Chen didn't believe that Luo Tianshun would allow Luo Li, with no trump cards, to leave the Luo God clan and come to the Northern Song Spiritual Academy. As his voice fell, he didn't hesitate any longer. His figure moved, darting forward with incredible speed. "Where are you going?" Wu Jia's eyes turned cold when he saw this. Behind him, a spiritual array activated, and a torrent of energy surged forward, rushing toward Mu Chen. Swish! A torrent of sword energy swept through, intercepting the spiritual flow. Then the sword energy spread out, counterattacking Wu Jia and entangling him. Meanwhile, Mu Chen used the opportunity to charge into the spiritual mist, vanishing in the blink of an eye. He knew that he had to rescue Shan Songxing and the others before the Devil Dragon Child dealt with Lin Zheng and the rest. If he failed, their situation would become extremely unfavorable. Swish! In the spiritual mist, Mu Chen's figure darted forward swiftly. He could feel the intense fluctuations of spiritual energy coming from a distant location. Clearly, Luo Li was already in a real fight with Wu Jia. Mu Chen withdrew his gaze, his eyes growing cold as he looked at the spear general he had captured. He sneered. "It seems like there are some things you haven't told me?" The spear general's face changed slightly as he shook his head repeatedly. "How could Wu Jia know our direction?" Mu Chen's voice turned icy. "Did you inform him?" The spear general hurriedly explained. "In the depths of the Western Wasteland Realm's spiritual mist, there's a spiritual array set up by Wu Jia, so he can sense some of the fluctuations inside." Mu Chen coldly glared at him, then flicked his finger. A stream of spiritual power shot into the mist, and through his perception, he detected subtle fluctuations. It was the faint signal from the spiritual array. Wu Jia was indeed quite capable. Mu Chen's eyes flickered, and with a wave of his sleeve, dozens of spiritual seals condensed around him. They spread and dissipated, forming a small spiritual array around him, enveloping him in a protective layer. This spiritual array wasn't strong, but it had the ability to block this kind of perception. Mu Chen didn't want Wu Jia to track his every movement. "Keep leading the way." After doing this, Mu Chen's gaze turned indifferent as he looked at the spear general and spoke coldly. The spear general, shaken by Mu Chen's gaze, quickly pointed the way forward. On their journey, Mu Chen didn't encounter any more obstacles. After blocking Wu Jia's perception, it seemed that the man wouldn't be able to detect his location. About 10 minutes later, Mu Chen slowed down. Ahead, a massive ravine appeared, and at the end of the ravine was a deep valley filled with spiritual mist. Shan Songxing and Li Xiantong should be in that valley, but the mist is too thick to detect them clearly. The spear general pointed to the valley and said. Mu Chen nodded slightly, then flicked his finger. A blast of spiritual power knocked the spear general unconscious. Grabbing him in one hand, Mu Chen darted forward into the valley. Once inside the valley, visibility became even more obstructed. Mu Chen paused for a moment before soaring into the air. His spiritual energy erupted, and the black flame-like energy surged like smoke, scattering much of the surrounding mist. The terrain in the valley was complicated, and with the thick spiritual mist, it was difficult to locate the two people hiding there. So Mu Chen decided to unleash his spiritual power, hoping that Shan Songxing and the others, familiar with his energy, would respond if they sensed him. Mu Chen's actions were effective. Less than a minute after his spiritual power spread, a burst of energy exploded from somewhere in the valley. The energy signature was very familiar. It was Shan Songxing. Mu Chen's heart lifted, and his figure shot toward that direction. After several breaths, he slowed down, his eyes narrowing as he gazed ahead. On a cliff, there was a cave, and standing outside the cave was a figure. Shan Songxing. Seeing that familiar figure, Mu Chen let out a sigh of relief. At this moment, Shan Songxing's skin was covered in dark blotches, which seemed to be squirming, emitting a sinister aura. This made him look exceptionally haggard. However, despite his poor condition, a smile still lingered on his face, and the air of arrogance around him was undiminished. "Heh, I didn't expect you to be the first to arrive. This is quite a surprise," Shan Songxing said as he looked at Mu Chen, unable to suppress a smile. Mu Chen landed at the cave entrance and casually threw the Qiyu and Mao Jiang onto the ground. Qiyu and Mao Jiang? You actually took them both down? Shen Songxing was a little surprised. Although Qiyu and Mao Jiang were ranked 7th and 8th, they were both at the early heaven-reaching stage. They were strong, so it was unexpected for them to fall to Mu Chen. Senior Lin Zhang and the others have arrived as well, but the situation doesn't seem too good, Mu Chen said, glancing at Shen Songxing. What about you two? It doesn't look good, Shen Songxing shrugged helplessly and turned to walk into the cave. Mu Chen followed him in. Inside, he saw Li Xintong, who was in worse condition. His body had even more dark blotches than Shen Songxing's, and the same sinister energy seemed to be radiating from him. Li Xintong lifted his gaze, his face marked with a dark blotch, making his once handsome features appear eerie. When he saw Mu Chen, he forced a bitter smile. Clearly, he hadn't expected Mu Chen to be the one to find them first. How did this happen? Mu Chen asked, confused. Given Shen Songxing and Li Xuantong's strength, even though the enemy outnumbered them, it shouldn't have been this disastrous. The Devil Dragon Child was well prepared. His strength has already reached the late heaven-reaching stage. During our previous fight, he had been hiding his true strength. It wasn't until we were surrounded that he revealed his true power. Moreover, he brought the Devil Dragon poison from the Dragon Demon Palace. It's a potent poison crafted by a supreme powerhouse, extremely dangerous. We got poisoned, and our strength has been unable to recover, Li Xintong said calmly. Late heaven-reaching stage? Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. So the Devil Dragon Child had indeed reached that level. At this point, even Senior Lin Zhang couldn't possibly be a match for him. The cultivation methods in the Dragon Demon Palace are extremely sinister. Although their later stages are limited, the early stages progress rapidly. I've made a mistake this time. I didn't expect the Devil Dragon Child to break through so quickly, Shen Songxing frowned. He had already reached that stage himself. If he were to enter seclusion now, he would certainly also reach the late heaven-reaching stage, but unfortunately, because of the Dragon Demon poison, they had been unable to shake off the pursuit of the Devil Dragon Child's group. Right now, the most important thing is to get rid of this Devil Dragon poison. If the Devil Dragon Child really has reached the late heaven-reaching stage, Senior Lin Zhang and the others won't be able to hold on much longer. We need to help them as soon as possible, Mu Chen said, deep in thought. Shen Songxing sat down helplessly. Only a supreme powerhouse can cure the Devil Dragon poison. We're powerless. Mu Chen furrowed his brow. A supreme powerhouse? If they could summon a supreme powerhouse, then the Devil Dragon Child would have no more room to act arrogantly. The Devil Dragon Child was relying on the fact that North Song's Spiritual Academy would never send a supreme powerhouse after him, which was why he had been so brazen. I'll give it a try. My spiritual energy is a bit special. Maybe I can suppress it, Mu Chen said after a brief pause. His spiritual energy merged with 9 nether flames, which should have some restraining power against such sinister toxins. Shen Songxing and Li Xintong nodded in agreement. Now, they could only try anything. Mu Chen walked over to Shen Songxing, extended his hand, and the black flame-infused spiritual energy surged upwards, releasing a wave of intense heat. He placed his palm on Shen Songxing's crown, and his spiritual energy flowed into him. Shen Songxing didn't resist, allowing Mu Chen's energy to enter his body. As Mu Chen's spiritual energy entered Shen Songxing, he could feel the severity of the situation. The Devil Dragon poison moved like poisonous serpents, writhing throughout Shen Songxing's body. Wherever the poison passed, it eroded and consumed the spiritual energy, preventing it from recovering. This was why Shen Songxing and the others had been unable to regain their strength. After a brief moment of thought, Mu Chen manipulated his spiritual energy to form a barrier around the poison. With the black flames rising, he prepared to refine and expel it. Hiss. As the black flames engulfed the poison, it seemed to sense the danger. Black flames surged, mingling with the spreading poison, intertwining into a sinister dance. However, what made Mu Chen's heart sink was the sheer resilience of the Devil Dragon poison. Even when subjected to the refining power of the 9 nether flames, it clung stubbornly, refusing to dissipate quickly. Though it was indeed being eroded bit by bit, the process was agonizingly slow. Mu Chun let out a silent sigh, withdrawing his spiritual energy, his expression dark. At this rate, it would take several days to completely expel the devil dragon poison from Xian Zongxing and Li Xianong. But right now, time was a luxury they didn't have. Seeing Mu Chen's grim expression, Xian Zongxing and Li Xianong sighed as well. They hadn't held much hope to begin with, but disappointment still crept into their eyes. Mu Chen's brows knitted together. The 9 nether flames could indeed refine and expel the poison, but it clearly wasn't strong enough. If he had a more powerful flame, he might be able to eliminate the devil dragon poison much faster. But where could he possibly find a fire stronger than the 9 nether flames? Mu Chun fell into deep thought, the oppressive silence of the cave weighing on everyone's chests like an invisible force. A stronger fire, he murmured to himself. Then, suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. A fire stronger than the 9 nether flames? Hadn't the 9 nether sparrow evolved successfully? And with that evolution, hadn't its flames advanced as well, transforming from the 9 nether flames into the undying fire? A gleam of hope lit up Mu Chen's eyes. Narrowing them slightly, he focused his mind and sent his consciousness into the Qian Kuan bracelet, searching for the 9 nether sparrow, which had entered its evolutionary state, transforming into a massive egg after overcoming its tribulation. Within the Qian Kuan bracelet, Mu Chun quickly found the mysterious black egg, intricate violet patterns glowing faintly across its surface, emanating an overwhelming power. Carefully, he sent his thoughts into the egg. He had no control over the undying fire, so his only hope was that the evolving 9 nether sparrow would hear his call and grant him a wisp of its flame. 9 nether, hurry! His heart urged desperately as he whispered the words in his mind. Meanwhile, as Mu Chun struggled to obtain the undying fire to expel the deadly poison from Chen Zongxing and Li Xiantong, deep within the western Desolation realm, chaos reigned. The land lay in ruins, riddled with massive fissures, shattered peaks crumbling into dust. Boom! On the remnants of a collapsed mountain, a figure descended like a meteor, smashing the fractured stones to pieces with a single punch. Then, reaching into the debris, he grasped a blood-covered figure and hauled him up. Gue Xiong's gaze was cold and indifferent as he stared at the unconscious, gravely wounded Lin Zheng. Without hesitation, he turned and strode toward another battlefield.